This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Extremely dangerous to our democracy.
No beast is more savage than man when possessed with power answerable to his rage. Plutarch. Welcome to Questions Worth Asking, hosted by the White House at Ephesus. Join us as we pick apart why something is the way that it is and the events that propelled it to this point. Stick around to ponder where we want it to go and how to get there. Thanks for being here. Keep in mind the answer to why is always logical, but often irrational. In 1998, Hugo Chavez was elected to be president of Venezuela. He took office in 1999. Throughout the 90s, Venezuela experienced an economic boom due to a staggering increase in oil exports. By 2001, Venezuela was the most financially prosperous country in South America. Today, Venezuela is essentially a failed state with a dictator. So what happened? The Venezuelan people realized that they could vote for the government to give money to them. They used democracy to usher in socialism. Now the country is essentially collapsed as people suffer from poverty, hyperinflation, and they've traded one dictator for another. Venezuela proves that democratic states can and do fail. Our news cycles recently have been filled with stuffed shirts and talking heads warning about threats to democracy, and the fervor has died down a little bit, but it'll come back as soon as Trump takes office, mark my words. All these people are warning about dire threats to democracy, but what are they actually worried about? What hangs in the balance? The Declaration of Independence gives us a pretty good idea. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Liberty. Does democracy guarantee liberty? In Federalist 51, James Madison wrote, "But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary." Democracy. What is democracy? The simple definition is that it's one person, one vote. The thing that we don't talk about or don't like to admit is that democracy is essentially mob rule or collectivist rule. The chief characteristic of democracy is that political minorities, race, culture, ethnicity, religion, are at the mercy of the majority. So we've got our working definition of democracy. Let's get ourselves a working definition of liberty. Liberty is the freedom to exercise your individual rights with minimal interference by the government. The chief distinction between liberty and licentiousness or anarchy is that liberty incorporates responsibility and accountability. You can exercise your rights provided that you are not infringing or impacting the rights of somebody else. The core pillar of liberty is equality, not equity, equality. That is uniform rights, the application of law, and justice. Liberty is expressed by government through consent of the people. The people get together and say, we consent to be governed in this way. So it seems that democracy and liberty are at least somewhat at odds with each other. This isn't a new thought. A voice from antiquity, Diogenes, said, "The mob is the mother of tyrants." And lest you think that we are modern people and we have progressed past that point, Friedrich Schiller says, "The mob is the most ruthless of tyrants." It's a sentiment that echoes across history. Majority collectivist rule comes with inherent inequality. It is just part of how the system operates. Regardless of intent, oppression of political minorities is a function of the system. When you have a system that is built on majority rule, that's just how it works. On December 7th, 1941, a Japanese task force attacked the naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. 74 days later, President Roosevelt, FDR, signed Executive Order 9066 on February 19th, 1942. Executive Order 9066 established the Japanese internment program. On a surface level, it's easy to think that the Japanese just attacked the United States. Some level of caution may be warranted. Granted, the government's reaction was severe in the extreme. However, President Roosevelt, FDR, had the Office of Naval Intelligence, the ONI, the Military Intelligence Division, and the FBI surveilling Japanese Americans since 1936, 5 years prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor. Initially, the public was opposed to the incarceration of Japanese Americans, but by the end of 1942, the majority of Americans supported it. So what did Executive Order 9066 and the follow-on actions do? 80,000 second-generation Japanese Americans and 47,000 first-generation Japanese Americans were displaced from their homes in the continental United States. Anyone with 1/16th or greater Japanese ancestry was affected. In total, somewhere between 110 and 120,000 Japanese Americans were taken from their homes in Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and California and moved to concentration camps. The government was worried enough to incarcerate Japanese Americans, but by the second half of World War II, they were satisfied to let 20,000 of them serve in the military. And these patriotic Americans served in some of the most highly decorated units of the war. On December 16, 1944, President Roosevelt, FDR, issued Public Proclamation 21. Now, it might be easy to think that the American people and FDR had thought better of their actions and had repented. That's not true. The United States Supreme Court had just completed hearing the case Korematsu v. United States regarding the internment, incarceration of Japanese Americans. FDR timed Proclamation 21 to be released one day before the Supreme Court ruling was made public. Moreover, the Japanese were not allowed to return to their homes on the West Coast until January 2nd, 1945, after the presidential election of 1944. A Democrat administration intentionally prevented a large portion of disgruntled Americans from returning home to where they could vote before an election. The vast majority of Japanese Americans that were incarcerated lost everything. The government gave them $25 and a train ticket. Remember, this was something that was supported by the majority of Americans. Put another way, this was something that was democratically supported by the American population. So, is democracy bad? Yes and no. In small groups, we're talking families, tribes, neighborhoods, communities, things at that level. Democracy is fine. At that level, interpersonal relationships play a huge role in how we interact with each other. I know that any decision that I make is going to affect my neighbor Bob, and I'm going to see Bob every day for a very, very long time. So I need to act not only in my best interest, but to make sure that I don't make our relationship untenable. That being said, group size and the importance of interpersonal dynamics are inversely related. It means that as the group size gets bigger, the importance of interpersonal dynamics gets smaller. Put another way, I'm going to be far less concerned with a decision that affects someone who lives 5 miles away from me or across the country than I am going to be with a decision that affects my neighbor. In Federalist 81, James Madison wrote, "The latent causes of faction," and by faction he means special interest groups or political minorities. That's the easiest way to think of that. "The latent causes of faction are thus sown in the nature of man, and we see them everywhere brought into different degrees of activity according to the different circumstances of civil society. A zeal for different opinions concerning religion, concerning government, and many other points, as well as speculation as of practice. An attachment to different leaders ambitiously contending for preeminence and power, or to persons of other descriptions whose fortunes have been interesting to the human passions, have in turn divided mankind into parties, inflamed them with mutual animosity, and rendered them much more disposed to vex and oppress each other than to cooperate for their common good. So strong is this propensity of mankind to fall into mutual animosities that where no substantial occasion presents itself, the most frivolous and fanciful distinctions have been sufficient to kindle their unfriendly passions and excite their most violent conflicts. So Madison had a pretty unfavorable view of the mob. He's not alone. Thomas Fuller said, "The mob has many heads, but no brains." A mob is a monster with many heads but no heart, according to Voltaire. So is democracy bad? Well, at a small scale, no. Like I said, having a one-person, one-vote system at a small level, like tribe, family, neighborhood, is a good thing. That is when you need that level of representation. But as the group size grows, yeah, you get to a point where democracy doesn't work. So what about liberty? We said that the core pillar of liberty is equality. That means that in a liberty-based system, everyone has to have a say. So it follows that some form of democratic representation is required. In a liberty-based system, without representation of some kind, liberty dies. We've established that liberty is a danger to democracy. Does it cut the other way? Is democracy a danger to liberty? In Federalist 10, Madison wrote, "There are two methods of curing the mischiefs of faction, the one by removing its causes, the other by controlling its effects. There are again two methods of removing the causes of faction, the one by destroying the liberty which is essential to its existence, the other by giving to every citizen the same opinions, the same passions, and the same interests. It can never be more truly said than of the first remedy that it is worse than the disease. Liberty is to faction what air is to fire, an ailment without which it instantly expires. But it cannot be a less folly to abolish liberty, which is essential to political life, because it nourishes faction, than it would be to wish the annihilation of air, which is essential to animal life because it imparts to fire its destructive agency. The second expedient is as impracticable as the first would be unwise. As long as the reason of man continues fallible, and he is at liberty to exercise it, different opinions will be formed. As long as the connection subsists between his reason and his self-love, his opinions and his passions will have a reciprocal influence on each other, and the former will be objects to which the latter will attach themselves. From this view of the subject, it may be concluded that a pure democracy, by which I mean a society consisting of a small number of citizens who assemble and administer the government in person, can admit of no cure for the mischiefs of faction. A common passion or interest will, in almost every case, be felt by a majority of the whole. A communication and concert results from the form of government itself, and there is nothing to check the inducements to sacrifice the weaker party or an obnoxious individual. Hence it is that such democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. Theoretic politicians who have patronized this species of government have erroneously supposed that by reducing mankind to a perfect equality in their political rights, they would, at the same time, be perfectly equalized and assimilated in their possessions, their opinions, and their passions. Faction is the Achilles heel of representative government. We can't abolish liberty, that defeats the whole purpose, and we can't make everyone the same as much as some people might like to try. So we can't control the causes of faction. That means we have to control the effects. During the Revolution, the founders very carefully considered all the different kinds of government that mankind had experienced throughout history. After a lot of deliberation, they settled on a compound, federated, multi-branch republic. In their estimation, the government that they designed would be the most likely to be accountable to the people. It'd be the government that would be most likely to favor liberty and resist tyranny. So the founders considered the pitfalls of democracy, but we started this video talking about all the stuffed shirts and talking heads moaning and wailing about threats to democracy. So what's going on? Bertrand Russell has an observation that might be informative. He says, collective fear stimulates herd instinct and tends to produce ferocity towards those who are not regarded as members of the herd. So, who's part of the herd and who's stoking the fear? With that observation from Russell, let's re-examine what the talking heads and stuffed shirts are saying, what they're doing. They're trying to instigate a form of mob rule. Because what's really going on is there's a new democracy hiding in plain sight. It's not about preserving the country. It's about changing it to an elite class directing a bureaucratic machine. That's their democracy. Wait a minute. An elite class running a bureaucracy. There's a definition for that. It's an oligarchy. Now, as it happens, there's two oligarchies in the world today that we can look at. Iran and Russia. Now, Russia's been in the news quite a bit. But I encourage you to go back and listen to what the talking heads and the stuffed shirts are actually saying. Anytime they criticize Russia, they're actually criticizing Putin. They don't have a problem with the system. They don't like what the man in charge of the system in Russia is doing. They don't think he's doing things the way that they should be done. Democracy and liberty are obviously at odds with each other. The mob in liberty is at odds with each other. So can we save liberty? If we can, how do we preserve liberty? The founders spent a lot of time wrestling with that. The Federalist Papers occupy an entire book and are dedicated to that subject. But liberty is foundational to how our society functions. One of the interesting things to see is that self-proclaimed communists and socialists here in America still expect the freedoms that our liberty guarantees. In Federalist 14, Madison wrote, "In the first place, it is to be remembered that the general government is not to be charged with the whole power of making and administering laws. Its jurisdiction is limited to certain enumerated objects which concern all the members of the Republic, but which are not to be attained by the separate provisions of any. The subordinate governments which can extend their care to all those other objects which can be separately provided for will retain their due authority and activity." That's how it's supposed to work. It doesn't, but that's how it's supposed to. Pay attention to what people are actually saying, and keep digging for the truth, because it's not at the surface. William P. Young said, "When a crowd adopts a point of view en masse, all critical thinking stops." And the talking heads and the stuffed shirts and most of the media has done that. They've adopted a mass point of view. You're going to have to do your own thinking. You have to decide what kind of country you want to live in. Do you want to live in an oligarchy? Or do you want to live in a republic that's built on liberty? In Federalist 55, Madison wrote, "As there is a degree of depravity in mankind which requires a certain degree of circumspection and distrust, so there are other qualities in human nature which justify a certain portion of esteem and confidence. Republican government presupposes the existence of these qualities in a higher degree than any other form. Were the pictures which have been drawn by the political jealousy of some among us faithful likenesses of the human character, the inference would be that there is not sufficient virtue among men for self-government, and that nothing less than the chains of despotism can restrain them from destroying and devouring one another. I believe in our system. It's not perfect, and I think the founders would have told you that they didn't expect it to be perfection. They expected us to keep working on it. And that's something we have failed to do. But it's something that is worth continuing to fight for, to strive for. My wife and I take our kids to go voting with us. Our state allows mail-in voting, but we have made a point to take our kids with us to watch us fill out the ballots and stick the ballots in the ballot box, because we believe it's incredibly important that our kids understand the gravity of the process and the necessity for liberty-loving citizens to stay involved, to keep participating, to keep casting votes, even when we know that it might not matter that much. Hamilton, and I'm not a huge Hamilton fan at all, but even a broken clock is right twice a day. Anyway, Hamilton wrote in Federalist 71, "The Republican principle demands that the deliberate sense of the community should govern the conduct of those whom they entrust the management of their affairs. But it does not require an unqualified complaisance to every sudden breeze of passion, or to every transient impulse which the people may receive from the arts of men who flatter their prejudices to betray their interests. It is a just observation that the people commonly intend the public good. This often applies to their very errors, but their good sense would despise the adulator who should pretend that they always reason right about the means of promoting it. They know from experience that they sometimes err, and the wonder is that they so seldom err as they do, beset as they continually are by the wiles of parasites and sycophants, by the snares of the ambitious, the avaricious, the desperate, by the artifices of men who possess their confidence more than they deserve it, and of those who seek to possess rather than to deserve it. The ideals of our liberty that our nation is built on are contained in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, and the Bill of Rights. Democracy is not liberty. The talking heads and the stuffed shirts, the people that they're aligned with, the causes that they serve, their democracy is a thinly veiled oligarchy hiding behind the bureaucracy of the government. Their democracy is an attack on our liberty. The good news is their democracy can't survive while liberty endures. And I am duty bound to do everything I can to fight to ensure that my kids inherit our liberty. It's about time that we start fighting back against their democracy. We have to do work at the fundamental levels of our nation to correct course, to fix what has been broken. As well-meaning as some of them may be, politicians at the national level can't fix everything. What they can do is give us time and give us space to try to affect change from our level. It's popular now for people to say, get your kids out of the public education system, and that's a great first move, but it's not enough. We have to figure out what needs to be changed and start working in that direction. I have some thoughts about what to do, how to fix things, and how to prevent us from getting back to this place. If you're interested in what they are, let me know. Pertinent links are in our bio. You can find us at lighthouse.ephesus.com. If you want to keep up on what's going on, make sure you sign up for our newsletter. And most importantly, God bless.